the end of the day, what you really want to do is to understand what that vendor is providing your company, your business, and what that impact is if for some reason things go awry, things don't go according to plan.
SC Media and our sponsor Viso Trust are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Each month, the CISO Stories program explores a cybersecurity topic selected by the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community and provides content that examines that topic from a variety of perspectives. Hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, best-selling author of CISO Compass, the CISO Stories weekly podcast features content powered by the 1,100-plus members of Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CSC. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Michael Swinarski, Deputy CISO at a financial services company. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Michael, what attracted you to the cybersecurity field? I saw in your past that you were once a DBA, and this interests me because half of my career I spent as a DBA myself. So, I'm curious, what made you make that journey into security?
Sure, absolutely. No, it was a bit of a natural progression from building those highly available and data processing and storage, as well as the security models to keep that data confidential, right? So that just naturally led me into a more formal role in information security.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between those two because you're trying to figure out who has access to what information and what information that you have, and security is adding that layer right on top of that.
Absolutely. And I spent a lot of time creating access and reports and things like that in order to provide the information to the auditors so that they could actually see that we were doing all of the right things as well. So that was a very big help to our compliance areas.
Well, so today we're going to be talking about third-party risk management and the expansion of third-party risk management. So you've observed that the threat landscape has been changing, and how has that changed, and what implications does that have for third-party risk management?
So I think over the last several years, we've seen a lot of really interesting developments. When you think about where we came from, say, 10 years ago, when everybody was concerned with not being the next target breach. At that point, everybody was really just focused on making sure that they were knew their vendors, they were assessing those vendors, and how they were going to be able to do that at scale. And a few years later, with SolarWinds, we found that more and more companies needed to look at understanding how their software suppliers were doing secure software development lifecycle, how they were doing code testing, how they were doing vulnerability management, how all of those practices were in place. And just in the last couple of years with COVID, this kind of brought up all sorts of new needs to have a broader understanding of the entire end-to-end supply chain. And as a result, that put a lot of folks back on their heels once again, because they weren't just looking at their immediate vendors, but much deeper into the process. And I would say just in the last year, what I've seen is considerable change because of the rise of business email compromise. And this is actually putting third parties into your risk profile that you would have never thought of. Entities that you have no relationship with. In some cases, it's your customer. I can't tell you how many calls I've had where I was reaching out to third parties, letting them know we're getting all sorts of phishing emails from you, and it was the first time they had ever heard of us. So I suspect that need for that agile and responsiveness and changing over time is going to be very important.
So, what should organizations be doing to deal with the whole business email compromise, which has been growing in recent years, according to the
Right.
FBI statistics? It keeps it's kind of multiplying each year.
Right. Very much out of control. One of the things that we've done is that we've really looked at making sure that we have our own internal controls that are in place to prevent a lot of those phishing emails that come across. Even though when they look like they're coming from a legitimate party, a lot of those filters aren't stopping them right away, and so they're getting through like your standard filter and actually landing in someone's inbox and looking much more legitimate because it's not some strange email address. Uh, but making sure that we have local controls at the endpoint in order to prevent that code execution, things like that, but also the incident response and having the ability and the desire to reach out to some of these third parties and start building some relationships, start having conversations with these other entities that you never expected to, but letting them know, hey, this is happening, and share information, share that threat intelligence, have a conversation of, hey, these are the things that we're doing in our shop to prevent it from happening in yours. And what kinds of things are you doing with your security awareness? What are you learning it works or not works? And just have that dialogue in order to really have an impact.
As a security leader, safeguarding proprietary data isn't enough. You need a holistic strategy that extends to third parties and beyond. Between doing more with less, external pressures, and achieving digital transformation, effective third-party security feels unattainable. There's a better way. VisoTrust delivers fast and accurate third-party intelligence needed to make informed cyber risk decisions. With customers like Bain Capital, Bloomberg, and GM, VisoTrust automates third-party risk in minutes, providing deep insights for faster and efficient cybersecurity. With VisoTrust, you can automate cyber risk assessments with AI, identify and prioritize high-risk vulnerabilities, and continuously assess and monitor third parties. See how our AI-powered platform can improve your cybersecurity posture at CISOstoriespodcast.com/VisoTrust. You mentioned incident response. So how do we make sure that we're collaborating across that supply chain when we think of companies having, some of them having thousands of vendors? How do we make sure that we have a good collaborative process so that when that breach happens, that we're getting those proper notifications?
Well, pre-planning is absolutely the key, and it's one of those really great reasons to have those tabletop exercises, to look at a variety of scenarios, and actually identify this is an area where we might want to involve this particular vendor, and reach out to them and have some dialogue and share the incident response plans, and actually maybe write playbooks together, and continue those exercises where you're both at the table and you're having some dialogue about what's working, how to engage. If we do this, this is how you're going to respond, and just adding all of those things into that pre-planning so that by the time there is any sort of issue, you've already worked through all of the issues.
Yeah, I really like that because I think, so many times we look at those tabletop exercises and we look at in-house, how would we respond? But, what happens when we get notified from a third party? If we look at the SolarWinds incident, how do we react to that?
Right.
And we had Tim Brown on our podcast, after the incident happened. And he talked about, the things that they did during the breach, and then after the breach. And one of the comments he made is that, things are just moving so fast, and that you've got other people that are asking you what the status of where things are at. But one of the biggest things he said was that it was so important that they spend time with their customers and really educating them of what was going on. That was really, they saw that as a key during that breach.
No doubt whatsoever, and it's an important reason to have those communication folks at the table with you during those exercises to talk about that exact scenario. Because when things happen and when they reach a particular critical mass, there's going to be a lot of stakeholders that are going to want to know what's happening now. When are we going to start seeing service again? Where's my data? You want to work those things out ahead of time, and so having that right mix of people at the table during your exercises is absolutely critical.
So what do you do to figure out, which how do you manage the risk of these different vendors? Uh, how do you, identify them, prioritize them, categorize them? What sort of things do you do to make that happen?
So as far as the various types of systems and things that are involved, I'm a firm believer that there isn't necessarily a one size fits all answer. I see a lot of organizations where they're trying to use the same survey, the same process, all of that sort of approach. And I think that causes a little bit of a challenge, because at the end of the day, what you really want to do is to understand what that vendor is providing your company, your business, and what that impact is if for some reason things go awry, things don't go according to plan. And having an understanding of those kinds of risks and that likelihood of that happening is really what you're trying to determine. In some cases, it makes sense to review those third party attestations and the audit reports. In others, a much smaller, much more simple questionnaire where you're understanding, hey, do you have basic security hygiene and things like MFA on your email? And all of those things really should go back to give you some ability to work with a variety of stakeholders, from the results of that assessment and mitigate those changes. You want to be able to go to legal and help them understand the engagement as well as their capabilities so that they can put in some administrative controls at the contract level, right? You want to be able to educate the business so that they understand the pitfalls when things don't go according to plan. You want to be able to work with IT and map out where those risks are to the controls that are in place and continue to evolve where there might be potential gaps. And certainly, I highly recommend having that conversation with that vendor, with that third party, and sharing with them your perception of the risks, what it is you think that they can improve on without necessarily being dictatorial or anything like that, but make it more about information sharing, make it about a partnership. Hey, here's the things that we're doing, have you considered this? And growing all of those programs together.
So what sort of survey would you have? What would be a number of questions that would be in a small survey? Because some of these we see are very big these days. And what sort of
Right.
questions would you be asking to really get to the heart of are they a big risk or not?
Right. And again, it really depends on what that business is providing, what it is, the impact, and that business problem that they're solving. If they're holding data, if they are processing data, that's probably a much bigger assessment than, say, your firm that's supplying you with contractors, right? That it's really about finding that right size solution. Whereas that survey, that assessment for that data processing company, you're going to probably want to see some sort of third party attestation, a SOC 2 report, some sort of certification, some evidence that someone showed up there on site and actually looked at their program to see whether or not that they're doing all the things that they say they are. And sometimes there needs to be some follow up. I've seen vendors where they provide that SOC report, and it looks great. It's very concise and very clean, but the system description doesn't necessarily meet the business solution that they're providing. So let's have some conversation. And they that particular case, they actually did complete a SIG Lite in order to, and we scaled it down specific to the solution that they were providing. And it was a big help for us to understand what they were doing, and be able to have that conversation. We have other companies where maybe, like I said, they're supplying you with contractors. They're not storing any data. They don't have access to any data. But I do want to know, do they have basic hygiene on their endpoints? Do they have antivirus? Are they using email MFA? Because that's exactly the kind of opportunity where some bad actor is going to attack those vendors and then use that to phish us.
So how do you get to where you trust the stuff that you're getting back? Because you're obviously not going out and testing their systems. So how do you evaluate that as to whether you can trust these reports?
Certainly. And I think that I hear a little bit of that debate in the industry versus, where people are questioning, is it better to go and review the SOC reports and those certification uh, reports, or is it better to do the survey? And I think there's a little bit of give and take. And I think that's the example of where does that make the most sense, right? The nice thing about those attestation reports is somebody was there. Somebody put eyes on all of the documents and looked at the log files and was able to actually test the controls, right? Some say, however, that if you're really good at managing your auditor, you might be able to finagle some things so that the report is accurate, but maybe not as open as it could be, right? And there's some truth to that. But I would also argue that a shop that is doing that and a shop that is good at doing that, they're going to do the same thing with that survey as well. And so, that give and take, a lot of that comes back to relationships, conversation. Hey, this is what we're doing on our end. What are you guys doing on yours? And as you share the information back and forth as to what everybody is actually working on, you can start to kind of gain that trust through those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you found any tools, not specific vendor products per se, but any types of tools that have helped you in the risk management space, or is it that one tool by Microsoft that is our best tool for this? Just like it's the number one GRC tool, being Excel.
Well, I mean, the world is run by Excel, right? There's no doubt about that. We've been working very hard to get out of the spreadsheets, and actually apply some tools. I'm not sure that there is necessarily that magic bullet. At the end of the day, what you really want to do is encourage those conversations across the spectrum of stakeholders, and be able to share with them what you learn. And whatever tool is going to work for that audience, I think is what you want to focus on. Certainly, having metrics and reporting to show kind of the risks that are found and uncovered, and the issues and items that are found and tracked, and be able to show how that changes over time. That's certainly very helpful when you're talking to your executive leadership, and the business, to be able to show that, yes, there's a reason why we're asking all of these questions, and we're wanting to collaborate with everyone to make that difference and to see that trend line change.
How far do you go in your third parties in terms of evaluating them for security? Because when we think about it, we can go through all the layers, and we can have we can have software vulnerabilities, we can have vulnerabilities in our firmware, vulnerabilities in the machines that we're putting into our environments. Any place along that whole supply chain can be where I've introduced vulnerabilities into my environment. So how do you determine, what's the right risk level of things that I should be looking at?
Right. Again, it goes right back to what the impact to the business. What is the service that they're providing? I've had conversations with some of our auditors regarding, hey, we want you to assess these companies X, Y, and Z, and we do. We've actually developed a very specific assessment for those companies that are based off of the fact that they're COTS applications. But we want to understand how it is that they're doing their development life cycle. Where what are they doing to ensure that secure code design? And so that's why I say I'm that big believer in not necessarily a single one size fits all answer, because I need to look at what it is that business is going to do for me so that I can ask the right questions, and also interpret them based on the impact and the likelihood of really something that's going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Michael, this has been great. I think this is such a big area that needs to be addressed today, and it's so hard with the amount of staff that we have to focus on all of this. But I think it's such a big area because we've become so interconnected today. What final advice do you have for CISOs, emerging CISOs, new CISOs? Experienced CISOs as they're trying to build their third-party risk management programs?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that some shops overlook, and there needs to be some really strong focus on making sure that you have the people and the processes that are in place for talent development, and that talent and that development is really around making sure that the analysts, regardless of level, understand the business, understand how the business makes money, understands what could potentially impact, understands where the most critical systems are, so that they can equate that to the assessments that they're doing. And having that talent development is, I think, really important.
Yeah, great advice. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time today, Michael. We really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, VisoTrust. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.